Hi people, if you like my content, if you're interested in my content, you like this channel, please do subscribe. I don't say that in every video, but maybe I should do it more. So the general election 2024 is about 10 days away. Inevitably, I'm going to be making quite a few political videos. Um, for this one, I want to lay out my thoughts on the Conservative Party and why I won't be voting for them. Um, But this isn't going to be just like, oh, I hate the Tories. I'm going to analyze this a bit, and it's just my take. Other people will have different views, different experiences, but maybe this can echo or will echo what some others feel about it. Um, all the projections are the Tories are going to have a very bad loss, possibly their worst loss ever. Even if that's exaggerated, I think. I mean, at this point, I think Keir Starmer and the strategists will be looking at how do they answer questions about what they'll do in government rather than can we win the election? Because I think it's almost a given now that they will win the election. Um, it would be the upset of all time if Labour didn't win, put it that way. Upset to use a sporting term. Um, so very briefly, I'll just go through the other parties. Labour, I won't talk too much about them because I'll be making a specific video about that. Well, why would I vote or not vote for the other parties? Well, reform, that's just a given now. After Farage's stance, I'm disgusted by that. Any inkling I might have had for voting for reform is out the window now. And I don't want to sound like a broken record. I've already made two videos on this, but yeah, that sealed the deal for me. I will not be voting reform so long as Farage is leader and so long as that's their position, his position. Um, the Green Party, or the last party I would vote for probably, or one of the last parties, because A, they support the actions of Just Stop Oil, or rather they refuse to condemn it, the same thing really. They support the breakup of the United Kingdom. The Green Party of England and Wales favoured Scottish independence. Um, I just think they're a bit of a joke, to be honest. They're the only party that has co-leaders. I don't know how that would work out. If they ever got into government, which will not happen, would they have like a joint prime ministership? It's just nonsense. I think it's just the Greens trying to be different. Oh, look how cool we are, we're different. It's just, um, and I think, their crime policies would be outrageous. I think given half a chance, I think the Greens would actually close all prisons. They'd abolish the army. They'll never admit this, of course, but I honestly think there are Greens who have this mindset. Um, so yeah, that's the only thing I'll say about the Greens is they do want to get hard on the big energy companies, and I'd go along with them on that. But it's probably the only thing I would go along with them on. And I'm not a climate change skeptic. I think we should be assertive regarding green issues. I think we should be responsible. But I think the Greens, the British Greens, are, by British I mean, yeah, in England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, they're on the continent, they're a little bit more responsible, they're a bit more mainstream. I don't think that could be said of the Greens on these islands. Who else we have? The SNP. Well, I'm a unionist. I believe in the United Kingdom. So it goes without saying, I'm not going to give the time of day to a party, even if I was in Scotland, that want to break up the country. And I think it's valid to ask why John Swinney got to appear in the Question Time debate in York when people in York can't vote for them. Now, I accept that the SNP has the third highest number of seats, so they're a significant political party, but I think there should be Scotland-specific debates and then maybe one debate on the national level. But that was ridiculous. I don't like reform right now, but I think reform had more of a validity to be at that debate than I know they're going to do one with the Greens and reform it. I don't really like some of the approach debates have taken this year. Who else we have? Liberal Democrats. Well, the Liberal Democrats have always kind of been a convenient party for people who want to say, well, I don't want to vote Labour or Tory. I want to vote for a relatively mainstream party. And that's kind of been my take. I was a member of the Liberal Democrats for 5 years. Um, but I'm not overly taken by Ed Davey. In some ways, Lib Dems are just Labour light. And they also have the vices of Labour. There's a lot of wokery within Liberal Democrat thinking. Um, but I don't think they're particularly threatening. I don't think. I mean, put it this way, I wouldn't totally rule out voting for them. But anyway, that's more for another video. So, to get to the Tories. Um, now, I did mention independents like George Galloway. I think they are, and I'm not going to speak out against independent candidates because there may be some I agree with, but as a model, it really is a protest because an individual MP can never form a government, right? So it, that really is a protest vote. Um, the Tories, what I'm going to do is break this into kind of two areas: domestic policy or domestic record and foreign policy, because I do think there's differences. Now, I'm not going to vote Tory. I can't bring myself to vote Tory, but that doesn't mean I'm absolutely against everything the Tories have done or all their positions. Let me just tackle the elephant in the room, why I will not vote for them. I think fundamentally, I stand by what I said in a previous video. I think fundamentally, I have a survival of the fittest mindset. If you take, I mean, Jeremy Hunt and Mel Stride, their threats to make the welfare system even tougher, and the threat of sanctions, it's disingenuous for a start because there's already a sanction culture in place, which Hunt and Stride won't mention. But I just think it's very cynical, and it's something the Tories have been doing for 14 years. Um, I do think that the Tories regard claimants as one and the same as criminals. They won't say this, but I think that is their mindset because it's how they treat claimants. They basically have this attitude that people should be punished. There was a quote by Neil Kinnock in the 90s, I believe it was, when he said, "Don't get old, don't get poor, don't get disabled." And it was this range of things like, if you want to live under a Tory government, don't do these things because life will be even harder. And I think he was right. Um, I think that the Tories basically see claimants as a nuisance, so they see them as like, oh well, we better punish them, we better pitch our base, and I think it's abhorrent. One example of this Tory mindset is Laura Trott, who I believe was Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Her attitude was that disabled people have a duty to work from home. Now, this just shows how detached she is, because it's this assumption that everyone can easily do that. If someone is in chronic pain for a large part of the day, if they have really debilitating illnesses that really makes it difficult to work from home, because working from home is still work. It still involves a certain approach. For example, if you're doing business on Skype, I'm a tutor by background, an English tutor. That requires, half an hour of talking to a student, going through grammar, um, if I had chronic pain, I would imagine that would be incredibly difficult to do. Um, so Laura Trott's attitude to that I found totally disgusting, and it's just an example of another Tory minister who doesn't live in the real world, or who it's just callous. I found that totally disgusting. And then early when this current Tory crop came into power in 2010, they had that abhorrent billboard, Strivers versus Scroungers, in the Cameron government. Whatever it got right, um, I think the way that they hammered the unemployed, the way that they, really enforced the sanction culture, and they're not unique. It has to be said, New Labour done this as well. It's one thing that is more dubious about New Labour. New Labour push workfare, New Labour push sanctions. The Tories just escalated it. Um, unquestionably, unquestionably, in the last 14 years, people have been driven to suicide because of their punitive measures in the DWP. I think that's a disgrace. I think it's a disgrace that people who are terminally ill have been told that they're fit to work by DWP bureaucrats. I signed a petition last night about this because, I think there's sort of echoes of the post office scandal whereby claimants, through no fault of their own, have been, overpaid, or they've been slotted into some interview that they didn't attend because they were not told. You get these sort of situations and then they're sanctioned. I think there is far, far too liberal a sanction culture in the DWP. They just throw out sanctions like confetti. Um, that's something that Tory voters don't consider. They think, oh, these people are getting free money. Well, that's a myth. There is no such thing as free money in the DWP. at least regarding, okay, there are situations where people who are disabled don't have obligations to find work, just well, technically that free. But I'm talking about this mindset that Tory voters often have, that people who are unemployed are just getting free money with no obligations. It's nonsense. There's actually very strict obligations, and anyone who's been through the system will know what that is like. I'm not really a fan of reality TV, but it would be interesting to see an experiment where Tory ministers who are very outspoken about this, people like Ian Duncan Smith, Mel Stride, Laura Trott, they're forced to go into a job centre and experience what it's really like. To go through that anxiety, to survive on the sort of money that claimants are given. Um, Now, the caveat, of course, is there are people who abuse the system. You may have heard of the Bulgarian gang recently. They raked up, I think, 45 million. That's an absolute disgrace, and it's right that they're serving long prison sentences. I've always said that, people who abuse the system should be penalised. But the problem is the Tories just want to penalise everyone. It's kind of a collective punishment approach. I think there is a survival of the fittest mindset in Tory ranks. It's this idea that if someone is struggling, if they're unemployed, if they're homeless, it must be their own fault. I think there is a fundamental lack of compassion in Tory thinking. Um, am I saying that every individual Tory is cold blooded? No. There will be plenty of Tories who give money to charity and who are individually are decent people. But I think as a party ideology, that's what it is. I think there's a survival of the fittest mindset there. So that reflects very badly on them. And it is a simple reality that on their watch, poverty has increased, homelessness has increased. That's a reality. And it always happens when the Tories are in power. It's not to say that Labour's record is perfect, but whenever the Tories are in power, the wealth poverty gap gets worse. And at the moment, it's one of the worst in the developed world. That's their legacy. Now, what have they got right? I struggle to see a great deal, to be honest. The big elephant in the room, of course, Brexit, is something that people like Boris Johnson will point to. Oh, we delivered Brexit. But then a lot of Brexiteers, people who vote for Brexit, are not happy. They still don't think we've taken back control. Well, I'm sorry, but blaming the EU is a bit of an invalid argument now. We're out of the EU. So you can't blame the EU for our problems anymore. Small boats issue. That's something the Tories have failed to control. Um, it is a complex problem. I don't think there's any quick solution to that. I've seen some Reform Party not candidates, excuse me, some Reform Party voters advocating murder on the North Sea. They're basically saying we should send in the Navy and blow the boat up. I think that's abhorrent. Now, I'm no bleeding heart liberal. I think we should have a tough system, but there is unquestionably a pretty toxic mindset with some Reform voters. Um, but maybe that's for another video. Um, but frankly, I don't. I didn't vote for Brexit, so why am I going to cheer the fact that Brexit was delivered? That's good for the Tory base and it's good for people who voted to leave, but there's many of us who didn't. And one thing that really annoys me is this idea that even the mere mention of having good relations um, with our neighbours, yeah. The Netherlands, France, Germany, even having good relations somehow equates to, oh, they're trying to get another referendum. David Cameron recently mentioned having good relations, and he was immediately pounced on by these Brexit zealots, saying, "Oh, he's a closet Brexiteer. He wants to have another referendum." So, are they saying they don't want good relations with our neighbours? There is a zealotry and a puritanical zeal about Brexiteers. I mean, they absolutely hammered Theresa May over this. Um, and I think she tried her level best. I really do. One thing Sunak did achieve was the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's not perfect, but credit where credit's due. Another thing Sunak's pointed to in this campaign is his effort during the pandemic um, to help businesses. Now, there's some criticism as well that he may have inadvertently helped the virus spread with the, you know, offers at pubs and so on. But I actually don't think Sunak's by any means the worst Tory Prime Minister. I just think that he's had the misfortune to be the last one in a series of five. So a lot of the heat falls on him. I do think he's picking up a lot of the mess of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. I mean, Liz, the thing about survival of the fittest, that budget that Liz Truss came out with, it just shows, and even a lot of Tories recognise it, the optics were appalling. It looked like she wanted to prop up the city of London, to hell with the rest of us. Oh, I won't have growth. I think there is optics in the Tory party that they exist for the rich. And the thing is, the counter argument there will be there's many working class Tories, both voters and candidates. John Major came from a pretty humble background. Margaret Thatcher was middle class. But frankly, that matters less to me than what their approach is. And I do think that there is a mindset in Tory ranks that kind of admires wealth. And the flip side of that is I think that if people are struggling, it must be their own fault. That's Tory thinking through and through. And it's not something I have any time for. They say we're the party of aspiration. Well, I'm all for aspiration. But Hunt and Stride want to punish people, and they're not factoring that people are applying for jobs. But in the end of the day, it's up to employers to give those jobs. So if someone is applying for positions and they're just not getting them, that's not their fault. If they're trying their level best, if they're trying to make their CV sellable, if they're trying to get work experience in the voluntary sector, and they're still just not getting jobs because employers are going to people who have specific experience in that area. That's something Hunt and Stride don't consider. They just think, oh, they've been on the dole for a long time, we better punish them. Um, it really angers me. Now, I'll move on to foreign policy to wrap this up. I'm sure there's other things I could talk. Well, I'll very briefly talk about crime because it's the one big area where you would think the Tories would be strong on. I'm very disappointed in that. Although I would say I don't think any political party can get this absolutely right until the legal establishment, that is, judges and the sentencing council and the Court of Appeal, until they get into the real world. I think actually that's a bigger problem because at least we can vote politicians out. You can't vote judges. This is something that people need to consider. This is why I think it's such a big issue. The discrepancy between public opinion and the justice system. I think the Court of Appeal is utterly living in a bubble. The thing is, ministers or candidates on either side, Labour or Tory, will talk tough. But then when they get into power, they'll say, oh, but we can't interfere in the judiciary. So I would argue that actually there's limits on what politicians can do regarding crime and justice. I would say that the Tories still could have done more. Credit where credit's due. Dominic Raab, as Justice Secretary, had created a situation where victims of crime had more say in parole hearings. That's good. Um, and there's been a bit more transparency with sentencing regarding the fact that sentencing is now televised. But one does struggle to see much else. Um, Acid attack crimes have been on the rise. Women have not got justice. The number of rapes that are prosecuted is appallingly low. Um, there's far too many people getting suspended sentences for violent crimes. That is all on the Tories' watch. Um, Alex Chalk recently admitted that they had to release prisoners early, although he insisted they wouldn't be violent prisoners. Well, they failed to tackle the issue of overcrowding. They failed to build prison spaces. This is a record. So even on the issue of law and order, which is the one area I would hope the Tories are strong on, they failed. One big thing they've got right, I'm trying to be balanced here. One thing they have got right, at least the Tories haven't played identity politics, and Labour cannot accuse them of racism when you consider how diverse they have been. The Tories have greatly improved in terms of internal diversity. They've had three women prime ministers, they've had more ethnic minorities probably than any other party. So that's one area Labour can't attack them on. Also, the Tories, I think, have got it right regarding the culture wars, something I think the left push far more than the right. Issues like women's spaces and so on. What is a woman? These aren't actually trivial things because they get into issues around free speech, women's rights. They're important issues. And I think there the Tories have got it right much more than Labour. But I'll bring that more into the video on Labour. Finally, because I'm just aware of the time, I'm going to wrap this up. Foreign policy. I give credit where credit's due. Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak have all been assertive with Russia. They've all stood up to Russia. Theresa May expelled Russian diplomats. Um, and Johnson, Truss, and Sunak have all been on the right side of history regarding Ukraine. I give them credit for that. And one thing I will say about Liz Truss, notwithstanding her disastrous budget, regarding China, she's the only prime minister in recent years who has been consistently tough. Only one. Sunak has flip flopped. Johnson has flip flopped. Sunak talked about Johnson flip flopped on Huawei, the mobile phones thing, about whether or not he would ban it. Um, Sunak spoke about banning Confucius Institutes and he rolled that back and nearly withdrew government funding. I think we have been too weak on China. Dominic Raab, again, to give Raab credit, as Foreign Secretary, he recalled the Chinese ambassador over the Hong Kong situation. But there is still this mentality of we better not provoke the Chinese, of overt caution, exemplified by James Cleverly and Rishi Sunak. It's not good enough. I think we need to be a lot more vocal with China's antics and their attempts to interfere in our democracy, their stoking up of nationalism on our shores. The Tories have failed in that regard. I would have liked them to be a lot tougher with China. It remains to be seen whether they ever will be. I think David Cameron was right to take military action against Assad. I think they're absolutely right to support Ukraine. And one of Sunak's stronger moments, I believe, was that speech he made in the Kiev Parliament, comparing the current situation to 1942. Um, I've no big concerns with Starmer in that regard. Um, but in another area of foreign policy, support for Israel, some of the things Israel's doing right now, this blind green light support makes me uneasy. I think it's wrong. Incidentally, there was two other prime ministers who withdrew support from Israel, withdrew arming Israel. It was Tony Blair in 2002 and Margaret Thatcher in 1982. So it can be done. Support for Saudi Arabia. There's some real moral questions there regarding Saudi's bombing of Yemen. I don't think that reflects well on this country. What else can be said? There's a lot of other geopolitical relations I haven't really got into here. For example, India is an important one. Um, Rishi Sunak, the first British Prime Minister of Asian heritage, he's wanted to have kind of a Pacific century with India. It hasn't quite worked out that way. I don't entirely trust India at the moment, quite honestly. Um, there has been some trade deals done with other countries. Some of that was Liz Truss as Foreign Secretary. Credit where credit's due. This mindset that purist Brexiteers have that we should somehow be hostile to our European neighbours is obscene. Um, anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I've said a lot. But the fundamental reason why I won't vote Tory, even though I agree with some of the positions on woke ideology, on supporting Ukraine, the reason I won't vote Tory is primarily because I think they lack compassion. I think that survival of the fittest mindset they have is detached. When Rishi Sunak says that his hardship was being deprived of Sky TV, that says it all. Um, I also would say that Brexit was very much a Tory project. Another thing, and I'll wrap it up with this, sleaze. I mean, Partygate is something I cannot easily overlook because it was one rule for them and another rule for everyone else, but sheer arrogance. And I know Tory voters will say, oh, it's scratching the barrel, but that says something about the arrogance of power. I do think the Tories have this entitled sense that they belong in power. Um, so for all those reasons, I won't vote for them.